Okay, let's talk about the parts of ourselves we try to hide. You know, the parts we deny or maybe even wish we could just get rid of. We're going to dive into what's called the shadow self and explore how actually befriending it might just be the key to unlocking your true power.
Have you ever said that to yourself? Maybe after you snapped at someone you love or had this huge emotional reaction that felt like it came out of nowhere. It's that weird, disorienting moment where you almost don't recognize yourself. Well, that feeling? That's usually your first jarring introduction to your shadow.
So let me paint you a picture from our source material. Imagine this. A simple mix-up with an oat milk latte triggers a full-blown, body-shaking rage. Now, obviously, this wasn't really about the coffee. No way. It was about 30 years of swallowed anger, of being nice, that finally just erupted. It's the perfect example of the shadow bursting out when we least expect it.
So what exactly is this shadow? The term actually comes from the legendary psychoanalyst Carl Jung, and a great way to think of it is like a psychological basement. It's where we shove every single impulse, every emotion, every trait that we've learned is unacceptable. It's the home for our rage, our envy, our chaos, basically all the stuff we pretend isn't part of us. You know, so many of us learn from a really young age to be good. We're praised for being a pleasure to have in class, or for being the easygoing friend. But to keep that up, to maintain that shiny persona, we have to bury other parts of ourselves. Big, messy feelings like ambition, desire, and especially anger get shoved into what our source calls the good girl's graveyard.
And here's the kicker. Pushing all that stuff into the dark doesn't make it vanish. It's not a solution. In fact, it's the opposite. Down in that basement, those exiled parts, they don't just sit there quietly. They fester, they get stronger, and they just wait for a moment of weakness, like a mistake with your oat milk, to kick the door down.
This question, from a therapist in our source material, is a complete game changer. It reframes the whole conversation. What if those outbursts, those moments of jealousy or passive aggression, what if they aren't signs that you're broken? What if they're actually desperate messages from those lost parts of you trying to heal the whole system and make you whole again?
And this brings us to the most incredible paradox of shadow work. It turns out that the very things we've been taught to fear, the parts of ourselves we've locked away in that basement, they're not our weaknesses. They're often the source of our greatest power. So let's break this down. That anger you've been stuffing down your whole life, that is the raw fuel for setting boundaries and protecting yourself. That selfishness you were told was so ugly, well, that's actually the engine for your ambition, your agency, your ability to go after what you want. And all that chaos you're trying to control, that's the messy, beautiful wellspring of creativity and spontaneity.
Jung himself said it perfectly. I'd rather be whole than good. Trying to be good all the time forces us to basically amputate huge parts of who we are. The point of shadow work isn't to be perfect, it's to be whole. It's to be an integrated, honest person who has access to their full range of strengths.
Okay, so this all sounds great, but how do we actually do this? How do you go down into the basement and make peace? Well, the goal isn't to destroy your shadow, it's to befriend it. And here are some real practical ways to start that conversation. So the next time you feel a surge of one of those bad emotions, envy, rage, whatever, instead of immediately shutting it down, just pause. Get curious. Think of it like a messenger who's just arrived with an urgent telegram. Ask it these questions. You're not letting the emotion run wild. You're just mining it for the incredibly valuable information it's carrying.
Think about Marcus from our source text. He spent his whole life beating himself up for being lazy. But when he finally stopped and interviewed that feeling, he realized it wasn't laziness at all. It was his body's deep intuition screaming at him to rest before he burned out completely. What he thought was his biggest flaw was actually his wisest protector.
All right, so once you start listening to your shadow, the next step is what we call integration. And this is key. It's not about letting your shadow take the driver's seat. It's about giving it a constructive, useful job in your conscious life. The very first step is to name these parts. Seriously, give them fun, personal nicknames. The bitch, the diva, the mess. When you do this, something amazing happens. They stop being these huge, terrifying monsters in the dark, and they become characters on your inner team. They become manageable. Next, you become a bit of a detective. You trace these parts back to their origin stories. Why did you banish them in the first place? Almost always, it was a survival strategy you learned as a kid.
When you realize the diva got locked away because you were told you were too demanding, you can finally see her true gift isn't being obnoxious, it's healthy ambition, and that shifts everything from shame to compassion.
Now, this might be the most crucial step of all. Integration is about conscious choice. It does not mean letting the bitch scream at a barista. No. It means you borrow her fierce energy to calmly but very firmly say no to that unreasonable last-minute project from your boss. You're giving these powerful parts a real, productive job to do.
So what happens when you actually start doing this work? What's the payoff? Well, it's nothing short of transformative. You literally start reclaiming huge chunks of your own power that have been locked away for years.
Our source gives this perfect example. Someone's offered a promotion. Now, the old good girl self would have just said, yes, thank you so much, and then proceeded to burn herself out. But the new, integrated self, she channeled the ambition of her diva and the boundary setting of her bitch and negotiated a higher salary, better hours, and a clear job description. That's power.
And this really is the ultimate takeaway. The parts of you that you've been taught to be ashamed of, they hold the keys to the kingdom. They are the very source of your resilience, your boundaries, your self-worth. By keeping them locked up, you're giving away your greatest strengths.
So, how do you keep this up? Here's a super simple tool you can start using right away: a monthly power audit. Just 3 questions. What part of me am I still hiding? What would happen if I let it out consciously? And how can I give it a healthy job this month? It's a really simple way to stay connected to your whole self.
Now, it's so important to remember this. Shadow work is not a one-and-done deal. You don't just fix your shadow and then you're good to go. It's a lifelong relationship, an ongoing dance you have with all the different parts of yourself.
And to help with that dance, you can create a little maintenance plan. You've got your monthly check-ins. You can also make a personal red flag list. You know, the little physical cues like a tight jaw that tell you a shadow part is knocking on the door. And my favorite, writing yourself weekly permission slips. Simple things like, this week I have permission to say no without explaining why. And let's be totally clear. The goal of all this work isn't to be more comfortable. Sometimes it's really uncomfortable. The goal is to be more real. You might end up being a little less nice in that old people-pleasing way, but you'll be infinitely more honest, more powerful, and way more vibrantly alive.
So, I want to leave you with a question to sit with. What parts of yourself have you exiled to the basement? What have you locked away down there? And more importantly, what incredible power, what treasures, what essential parts of your own wholeness are just waiting for you if you can find the courage to finally unlock that door?